piece of, and this is what we have. Haman de baila mida lahu lete kitma nehila. Right, it's rich Aramaic. One who seeks to know, and it says in the lighter print, meaning this is not the translation, but the context of the Gemara tells us that this is what we're discussing. One who seeks to know that the demons exist, what should they do? They should place fine ashes around their bed, and in the morning the demon's footprints will appear like chicken's footprints in the ash. You read this and you think, listen, it could be like 9:10 on a Sunday morning or 8:20 on a Thursday night. I don't know where to start with this. One second. If I want to know that demons exist, I got to put ashes around my bed and look in the morning for footprints of chickens. Now, it's really important, and I know you know this, but I'll say it anyway. There are unfortunately those who will just laugh at a piece of Agadah like this. They'll just say it's stupid. They'll say it's nonsense. They won't respect it as a teaching which has wisdom, but which is expressed in metaphor and in symbolism. I strongly object to such people, and I strongly object to such attitudes. That doesn't mean I understand this piece. That doesn't mean that before I read Rav Kook, or even after I read Rav Kook, I fully understand why this language is used, or necessarily know for sure what it means. What I do know is the sages who wrote the lines before and the sages who wrote the lines after were pretty smart. So I've got to make an assumption that they were saying something smart, not something silly. The Talmud is a remarkable encyclopedia of wisdom. Some wisdom is better understood, some less understood, some more relevant for today, some less relevant to today. But if I don't understand something on first glance, there's something wrong, not necessarily with me, but there's something wrong with me if I then say it is nonsense, it is foolish. So I read this and I say, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what it means, but okay, you know, if you say so. Should I understand the reference to demons literally? I don't know. Should I understand the reference to chicken's footprints literally? I don't know. I put myself in the world of not knowing, which in many ways helps us in light of what Rav Kook said last week, where he said that Agadah is really a pathway to help us crystallize and uplift our faith and our spirituality, because Agadah sometimes forces me into the world of the unknown. I read this and I feel I feel I'm lacking wisdom, lacking knowledge. Now it continues and it says the following. Hi man de bailem echzinahu letel shletat shunrata uchmata bat uchmata buchota bat buchota blikle benua lesachke v'lemile enei minei v'chazelu. It's always important at least to hear the sounds of the Gemara. One who seeks to see them, right? The Mechse means to see, should take the afterbirth of a firstborn female black cat, please. Born to the firstborn female black cat, burn it into the fire, grind it and place it in his eyes, and he will see them. Meaning, if you want to see these demons, this is the way to do it. I mean, if you don't want to see the demons, all you need to do is do the ashes and you get to see the chicken's footprints. If you want to see the demons, then this is what you should do in order to enable you to have that perspective. The Dilma gnivei minei lachtom pumei kiyechi delod litazak. Right, and it says he must then place the ashes in an iron tube, sealed with an iron seal, lest the demons steal it from him, and then seal the opening so he will not be harmed. Okay. Rav Bibi bar Abaya avad hachi chaza vitazak, bo Rabbanan rachme alei vitasi. Rav Bibi bar Abaya performed this procedure. He saw the demons and was harmed. The sages prayed for his mercy, and he was healed. Okay.
It doesn't say why they would want to see the demons.
I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know almost anything. I don't know, what's the name of the black cat who's after birth. I mean, I don't know. anything, right? What I do know is this is like a closed book to me, and I'd say to almost anybody. What do you do with this? Is it mystical? Is it symbolic? Is it philosophical? Is it just folk wisdom? The Talmud does contain folk wisdom. Sometimes we just say that was a folk wisdom of the time.
Do you think anybody does it now, today? Anybody would do this?
I hope not.
It's virtually impossible to know that the cat was the firstborn and the black cat was the firstborn.
That's a business. That's a business. Hello.
No,
Right?
but if you follow, maybe if you
Your cat,
follow.
you
these
Yeah,
black
you can
cats,
breed
no, I think
cats.
It is
Sure.
possible, I
Right, you
guess.
breed the cat yourself.
I don't think that's what's on your.
I don't-
Putting ashes in, it's the putting ashes in your eyes that I think nobody would actually recommend today.
I would hope so.
I don't
You
know.
know, whatever you do with cats, you can do with cats.
So do I think, I don't know, but I do know sometimes that people read Gemara literally, and that can sometimes be a very bad thing. Do I think that some people could read this and then say, maybe I should try it, even if it's not exactly the same? Yeah, because now where's a mistake? Not their curiosity. I praise curiosity. The mistake is not being educated to learn that some teachings should not be taken literally, even though they should be taken seriously, right? And we need to make sure that our education neither dismisses wisdom nor insists that everything should be taken literally. So if somebody does this, what do I think of them? I think of them individually as a curious person who thinks there's wisdom to be learned and is taking it literally. What do I think that's a right way to read this teaching? No. But my belief is that their teachers have a responsibility to therefore educate the difference of learning halacha and agadah. And we rarely do that. And especially in our mocking culture, we either take things seriously or laugh at them. And we often wrestle to find the wisdom within such statements. So our job here is to think a little bit about what could this mean. There is one personality mentioned in this teaching. Okay, sometimes there's no people mentioned. Here is Rabbi Bar Abaye. This is the son of Abaye, the great Talmudic master. He is Rabbi living in the 5th generation of Amoraim in Bavel. And a little look around, I brought it last time, I just brought it here just for, I think, this encyclopedia of Talmudic sages. There are various different versions of this kind of genre. Tells me that this isn't the only Agadic passage involving Rabbi Bar Abaye. So that also kind of rings a bell. If I had the time, and perhaps I'll make the time, I'd be curious to look at all the passages involving Rabbi Bar Abaye. What kind of passages are they? Are they more cryptic, less cryptic? Is this a commentary about him too? I mean, we said, has somebody tried this? Well, the answer is somebody did, yes. And so why did he do that? And why, if it's only him doing that, why is the rest of his peers not? What makes him so special or different?
He also got harmed.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a whole question unto itself. I mean, you take this short piece of Talmud, and I'm going to say I can't even deal with it because I need to know more about him to answer that question than is necessarily provided. And sometimes in my Daf Yomi insights, I will try and do some kind of spiritual biography of the people involved to try and make sense of why are they saying what they're saying, why are they doing what they're doing, obviously making it clear this is just a suggestion, and that's what I would do if I wish to explore this further.
What you said that the Gemara before this.
Yeah.
This is obviously in the middle of some Gemara. It's just about.
It's a teaching, right?
About demons, whether they exist or what they are. What.
It's about demons and how we deal with demons as they exist in this world. I mean, it's not if demons exist. The question is, how do they manifest themselves and how do we protect ourselves from them? Meaning there's a discussion about that. This teaching is distinct from that particular thread. There's basically sometimes in the Gemara you'll have something will be discussed which is halachic. They'll say, oh, you know the guy that mentioned this? Hey, let's mention some of his other teachings. And then you kind of have this a whole different thread of ideas, unrelated in terms of topic, but related in terms of authorship. That's what happens in Brachot 6a. And then he mentions something about demons, and the Gemara says, oh, on the topic of demons, just by the way, just to let you know, if you want to see them, this is what you should do, and the black cat and everything. So,
What do we mean by demons exactly? Like, it's such a, I don't know, like, what do they, like, I know what it means, but it's a foreign concept. Like,
I don't know what it means.
it's a foreign story, like, it's just so strange, like.
so in many ways, as we're going to see from our Kook here,
It's a demon.
no, so in many ways, what we're going to encounter here is one approach to make sense of some of those ideas. And if you look in a different commentary, you'll see a different approach. In a different commentary, you'll see a different approach. There are people who understand demons absolutely literally. That doesn't mean that they understand everything in this Gemara literally, but they'll say there are such things as demons, they're harmful, and we need to protect ourselves from them, and we daven to protect ourselves from them, and these are things we should do. Okay? And that's a strong line of tradition. There are others who say there are forces, we call those forces demons, but these are just negative, harmful forces in the world. And we need to protect ourselves from negative, harmful forces. And we use that term demons really as a catch-all term. And these are different ways to protect ourselves from negative, harmful forces. I mean, arguably, you could say secondary smoke is like a demon. It just comes out of nowhere and it could harm you. That may sound like a strange term, but it's still a valid term. Arguably, it's a force that came into me without my wish and is doing me harm, and I should stay away from things that do me harm. So you have scholars who take those approaches. Knowing the ideology of different mefarshim in terms of Agadah is pretty important. And just as different biblical commentaries have different approaches to certain things, so to take a simple example, the Ramban is prepared to criticize Avot, and Hakdaba Kabbalah is very firm in defending them. Rashi interprets things both literally and sometimes midrashically, and the Ibn Ezra will generally avoid midrashic interpretation. Different biographies. Abigail wrote that amazing book precisely on that topic. So too, there are spiritual biographies or commentaries who interpret Agadah differently. I don't know if there's a single book that describes all of them, but over time you get to know them. And so I'd say when I'm learning at home and I read a piece, I'd say, and on my shelves I say the Maharal and the Ben Ish Chai and this one and that one and Rav Kook. There's a reason why I chose that book to look at that particular piece, because I'm interested in that particular approach. And there's a reason on a different piece why I'll choose that book, right? Because I know they're going to approach things differently. So Rav Kook is going to understand demons here in a different way to the way others will understand it. Does that mean he's a final word on it? No, it means he's a approach on it. So what does demons mean? There's many answers to that because there are many approaches to that. But there's no doubt that the Talmud speaks about demons directly, and there's no doubt that halakha talks about protecting ourselves from forces which are both visible and invisible. Okay, that's normative halakha. Normative halakha is protect yourself from forces visible and invisible. What you call them and how you understand them, that's up to you. Any questions before we get into Ayeh, which is a longer piece here?
This might sound childish, but is this sort of insinuating that there's evil in black cats? Like Tom looks at cats and sees something evil?
Not necessarily.
Because if the demons are there.
You could say the same with chickens. We have chicken on Friday night. I don't generally have demonic chickens.
A black cat is a superstitious thing.
I understand, right? But we reject superstitions in general. Sometimes superstitions are developed from shallow readings of complex teachings, right? So, the Talmud talks about not walking under rickety ladder. Is that because of a superstition? No, it's because we don't want people to get hurt.
But they don't say demons aren't chickens and stuff. Sorry, they talk about cats.
No, I understand. Anybody can take almost any teaching and draw much from it. That doesn't make it true. That's
a superstition.
Could be anything. I choose to read this as being much more than superstition for two reasons. Number one, because I believe that most of the Talmud has deeper wisdom than that. And number two, the Torah prohibits superstition. So if I consider this to be Torani literature, I should understand it on its own terms and recognize that maybe, again, it's speaking through metaphor. Let's now begin. So we focused a little bit on the chickens, a little bit more on the cats. They seem to be animating us because I suppose that makes sense. We haven't spoken much about the fine ashes. I feel bad for the fine ash, maybe. And I say that because when you read a piece like this, what is a hook? So we did this last time, remember, and we were kind of, what bits of the Gemara were we noticing and which not? And it wasn't a trick question because I'm here as a learner, right? I also would have said, well, maybe it's the Shabbos lights or the Hanukkah lights. And Rav Kook said, pay attention to the two blessings rather than the one blessing, right? There's something in that. There's something in the fact that it was Rebbe who was also a carpenter. So what is a hook? And Rav Kook's going to go straight into it and try and unpack things. Is this literal interpretation? No, it's beautiful though. So he said, Yesoda kochot. I should just say a completely random thing. I'm going to try and always make it into 2 pages. Wherever possible, I'll make the print as large as possible. And if we've got more sources, the print will be a bit smaller. Okay, so it's a bit larger for old people like me. So I'm trying to make it better.
Yeah, that's the advantage of the Zoom.
That's
Yeah,
the advantage of Zoom. That's why it's called Zoom.
I did
Right.
make it bigger.
Yesod kochot hara'im hu pirud mniat ha'achdut. Anybody heard this idea before? Great. The foundation of all the negative forces is separation and the impediment of achieving unity, right? Ki ha'shalom hu ha'kli ha'machzik bracha. Shalom is the vessel that holds on to blessing. Now just pause it for a second. What's exciting about learning any great teacher, and here Rav Kook is, I had no idea where he was going to take this. I thought he was going to start talking about chickens and cats. I open in Ayeh, and I'm in unfamiliar territory in terms of the Haggadah. I mean, not just unfamiliar, like worlds away. And he begins with an idea which each of us not just understand, but I think we've been thinking about probably for much of our life, which is unity, achdut, as a people, as a world itself, is a good thing, and division and separation is a bad thing. Okay, so far, I'm good. And with the power of achdut, we find, within the power of achdut, we find the love for each other, and as a result of loving each other, we will love the Lord our God. But one who keeps himself separate is not seeking unity. Instead, they're seeking what is good for them, what they desire. As it says in Mishlei, for desire, basically the loner will be seeking, or translated, the loner follows their own passion. A person who follows their own passions often is doing things for me, not for we, right? Because they're looking for what's good for them, not necessarily what's good for us. And we are also told in Tehillim that all evildoers will be scattered. The idea of scattering, separation, is reflective of a negative force. Achdut, unity, is a good thing. Separation is a bad thing. Al tifrosh me'atzibur is, a warning that our sages say, and hine ma tov mana'im shevat achim gam yachad is a good thing. So what's this got to do with Gemara? Says Efer more ala pirud. What is ashes? Ashes represents separation. Shekodem serefoto hayagush, because before it was burnt and became ashes, it was one unit. Nifad efer, and then all of a sudden became separated into dust, into ashes. Ubetachlit pirud sharei eno bar gibul. Ashes are so separate that you can't knead ashes together. I It cannot be brought together in any meaningful way. הפירוד מורה בהיותו מילה, שאין שום גוף מחובר כלל. Its separation is evident by the fact that it can be sifted, that there's nothing binding it together whatsoever. כי אם חלקים נפרדים. It is simply a set of separate parts. Now, pause here for a second. He hasn't mentioned the Gemara. He's just laying the foundation for a derech of understanding the Gemara. That the ash represents separation and division and shalom, achdut, and the idea of bringing together and binding together and kneading together is a blessing. Now, what did the Gemara begin by saying? One who seeks to know that the demons exist should place fine ashes around his bed, and in the morning the demon's footprints appear like chickens' footprints in the ash. Okay. The next day, he's now quoting the Gemara, you see the chicken's footprints in the ash. Now, what's chickens got to do with anything? I mean, other than eating chickens. There is a hint in this reference that the separation gorem liot nishtaka b'tavat chomriot. That separation causes a person to become even more immersed in material and physical pleasures, which are about the self rather than about the many. Because material and physical pleasures is about giving yourself material and physical pleasure and not necessarily thinking about the wider world. Let's pause. So he's just building up an idea about unity and separation, that when a person pursues material and physical pleasures, oftentimes they are looking about after me, right? Not thinking about we. Obviously, Judaism doesn't reject material and physical pleasure in general, but at the same time, we place certain limits on how we engage with the material world, with the physical world. Now, what's the reference to chickens? Now, this you won't see coming, but it's an interesting Gemara. And I should just add, before we go on, while I review all this text, which is available online to make sure that there's no typos, and to add in sometimes a few additional details, sometimes Rav Kook makes reference to other sources, which I didn't add in, but in the actual book, they've been added in by the editor at the bottom. So he's now going to quote the Gemara. Which Gemara is it? He's going to reference the Gemara in Brachot Chaf. I did add it. I wrote it myself. There you go. I can't remember why I did. Yeah.
In the English, it says appear like chicken's footprint. So I didn't think it had to necessarily have anything to do with
Right. So the point is, like, right, is again the language of comparison. It's not to be understood literally. But the Gemara basically talks about sexual intimacy. But yet, at the same time, there is a sense of balance. And a Talmid Chacham should not be with his wife like chicken, which is code basically for being excessively active, shall we say, in the sexual realm. Rav Kook understands a reference to chickens as being a veiled connection to that teaching. Meaning, why do the rabbis use that metaphor there? Well, it's obviously just a metaphor that the rabbis use. And so you have here a teaching about ash and chickens' feet, which again seems to be very, very strange. And he's reading into it. Ash is about separation. The chicken's feet as an image represents this passing the point of appropriate enjoyment of physical and material pleasure to where your life is imbalanced, where you're thinking more about yourself necessarily. than others around, even perhaps even your spouse.
It makes you think of Sota, where Hashem allows his name to be put into ashes.
Mhm.
For the
Oh,
sake of
very good.
family relations.
Very,
like,
very good. Beautiful.
Definite connection there, I think.
I agree. Al ken meramez al ishtaka'ut b'ta'ava chomriyot. He says, therefore, I think this Gemara, in the language and symbolism it's using, is saying, don't be so immersed in your own physical and material pleasure life, such that there are literally chicken's footprints in it, that you pass the point of the right balance. Because once you get to that point, this is, and again, we don't mean literally a demon. It means that there are other forces within you which are motivating you, which are not healthy ones. So we'll pause here just for a second. You may think, what a crazy reading of this crazy text. You may say, what a brilliant reading of this crazy text. I don't know what we're going to say, right? But he's taken something which I had no idea what it meant.
Mhm.
He said, let's look what ash represents. And what he says makes sense, right? The idea that you can't unify, we don't generally use ash other than for mourning or moments of separation, right? So, okay, you're right, there's a message within that. Chickens, I mean, other than food, how much we talk about it, well, the rabbis use that language to represent a certain imbalance. Taken together, you know when you see a demon, kind of almost means in the mirror. You know when you're going to see a demon? When you wake up from your bed, remember that's also a code for what's being described. When you wake up from your bed and there's ashes around you and you see the footprints of chickens, as if in that moment you don't either feel a sense of unity with in terms of your spouse or in terms of the world, if in that moment you have been more driven by your self-pleasure than anything else, then that is the work of some kind of demon. We call it addiction, which is a demon. In fact, those who are unfortunately afflicted with addictions will for sure describe that as being overtaken by some kind of demon.
Also, just the fact that you're surrounded by anything means that you're separated. You can't get out of bed without
Right.
breaking that.
Right, that's I think that's the whole idea, that your bed is now an island, right? Where the moat is not anything healthy, but instead something quite clearly problematic. It's the ash of fire, of destruction, right? Of separation, of disunity. So he's now read into this teaching something of interest. Now, any further questions on that piece? It's ingenious, right? I mean, he's teaching us how to learn Agadah. He's saying, pay attention to the words, think about where they appear elsewhere in the rabbinic literature, take it seriously, though not necessarily literally, right? There are clues. We're being detectives here. You know, all those years of watching Columbo pays off. And no, seriously, because that's sometimes learning is just like being a detective. There's something there I don't know. You have to look for the clues. I actually even think that this is how we should be teaching how to learn. You know, there is this sense of curiosity, of hunger, wishing to know. Look at the clues. Take the text seriously. Any person who read that Gemara and just laughed at it, and unfortunately there are, is showing their ignorance, showing their lack of imagination. Now, let's go to the next piece, because it's all one piece, okay? He says, as I described elsewhere, in relation to what it says in Gemara Chulin, Kufhei Amud Bet. You may have heard this idea. before we eat bread, we wash our hands, right? We call that Maim Rishonim, the first water. There is a practice which some people have called Maim Achronim, of washing your hands before benching, right? Some people bring a cost to the table, some don't. Some men do it, some men and women do it, whatever. Some people don't do it. Here we're not going to discuss the halachot of Maim Achronim. But where we discuss Maim Achronim, why is there such a thing? Why would I wash my hands at the end of a meal? Well, the Gemara basically says, because of something called melach stomit, sodomite salt. Is that some kind of product? You know, I didn't buy any sodomite salt this week. They don't sell it in my makolet. But apparently I should be worried about melach stomit, because if I have melach stomit in my meal and then I touch my eyes will go blind. So in order to avoid that, I wash my hands from having eaten. Now, on one reading, this is just either an old wives' tale. This is something in the past. It's a myth, and people will just say, "I don't understand what the rabbis are talking about. It doesn't apply today." I think there's a deeper way of understanding Maim Achronim. I'd already thought about this a little bit beforehand, and Rav Kook takes it to a whole different level. He says, "So I want to talk about Maim Achronim." He's saying to us, where does he get to Maim Achronim from chickens and ashes? It's not yet obvious. What could be the link, by the way?
Like this idea that you could have sometimes danger or harm done to you if you put these ashes in your eye.
Right. So that's a clear connection. Eyes, ash, or this melach stomit, which apparently is a very bad thing. Although we're
Just
told.
know that we can't hear the people like when they talk.
Apologies. Should we repeat, or how would you like to do this?
Well, I didn't hear the last thing that she said for sure. Whatever happened before, but just going forward.
I appreciate it, and I really appreciate you speaking up because it's important. This is why we have these excellent microphones.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No, I guess
Yeah, I
not.
can hear you, but the further back they are from where the mic is, then those people are harder to hear.
Okay.
But I
Just-
can hear you, Melissa.
No. So just
Fine,
to
but
describe,
I'm
Melissa
against it.
walked away from there are two microphones. So there's a roaming microphone, shall we say, and we're just going to try and see if it works a little bit better. We'll try and let's try and make sure that we're in contact if further questions or insights arise. So the point was made that there's a connection between the melach stomit, that if you touch your eyes with this sodomite salt, it will make you go blind, and the previous teaching, which is talking about putting ashes in your eyes in order to see demons, meaning there's a connection here, but about from sight to sight. That was in response to my question, what is the connection between Maim Achronim and this agadic piece of brachot? One answer would be eyes. Although it's important to note, and we're still quoting from Malchulin, Mishtakaki Kur Tabachua, the ratio of melach stomit to whatever food is tiny. It's considered to be 1 grain per kor. What is per kor? Per 4,320 eggs, meaning we're talking about a tiny, tiny trace. Melach stomit is so dangerous, we wash our hands even for the smallest of traces. Again, should this be understood literally? Maybe. We're not going to just hold on to the literal meaning. He continues and he says, "Ube'emet amru shamayim achronim musmachim mikra v'nishtem v'hitem kedoshim." We derive the concept of Maim Achronim from the pasuk where it says, "And you should sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy." Elu Maim Achronim. This refers to Maim Achronim. Now, in general, if the rule of Maim Achronim is so that I don't go blind, I wouldn't derive that from that pasuk. It should be derived from a verse that says, look after yourselves. Right? The very fact that that is a proof text for Maim Achronim and Gemara Chulin tells me that Maim Achronim isn't just a physical threat, right? It's a spiritual threat of sorts. So then the question is, what is a spiritual threat? What blindness am I worried about for this small trace of melach stomit, physical or otherwise, that could go in my eye, even though I never put melach stomit in any of my foods? intentionally or otherwise.
Melach stomach, doesn't it refer to stone?
Oh, beautiful. Melech stomach, the key thing isn't the salt.
To separate yourself from having eaten.
Brilliant. Namely, melech stomach is not so much about the physical ingredient of a certain type of salt, but instead a spiritual ingredient of a certain type of attitude. Right? Sdom represents physicality, and ta'ava, right? That sense of lust, right? As he says, there's clearly an idea of sanctity with Maim Acharonim. He says, therefore, but I've interpreted, he's saying, I've interpreted this elsewhere, and I'm repeating it here, the idea of Maim Acharonim on two different levels. לבד הדבר הפשוט של תערובת מלח סדומית האפשרית להמציא כיכרות הבחורה, יש בזה דבר מוסרי נעלה מאוד. Above and beyond the possibility of a small trace of melach sdomit that could go in your eye and thereby blind you, he says, which I'm going to assume to be also relevant literally, I believe there's an ethical lesson to be derived from it. This was the sin of Sdom. What was the sin of Sdom? Right, to leer towards the physical desires. And he goes on to say, and basically a failing to live a much more ethical and appropriate life, where a person lives a more balanced life. Now he quotes from a pasuk in Yechezkel, and it says, Hinei ze haya avon stom achotech, gaon siv'at lechem v'shalvat hashket, haya lal uvlimotea, v'yad ani ve'avion u'lach zika. This is the sin of your sister Sdom, which was it? Pride, gava. She and her daughters had enough bread, all right, and had in shalva, they had tranquility, and yet they did not aid the poor and the hungry. What is the sin of Sdom? It is pride and precisely selfishness as in relation to bread and meals. It wasn't just being excessively interested in the physical world, it's being so interested in me, my physical world, not we. The lack of sharing, a sense and attitude of pirud rather than achdut, of whatever I had, even when I had plenty more, I didn't share. Basically, we have the ability to give, to be kind, to show graciousness, to share. And yet at the same time, that can be overtaken by other forces, where we become self-interested, where we don't share, where we show lack of kindness, where we show what we call in Chazal, midat sdom. You know, we have this in Pirkei Avot, right? What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. Yeah, it's midat sdom. Midat sdom can exist in our homes, in our attitudes. Each of us, unfortunately, can be afflicted with midat sdom. When, and this never ever happens with 5 daughters, when one of my daughters wants to go out on a Friday night and says, can I borrow a jumper? She says no, and she's not going out. There is a trace of midat sdom in that no. Like, as we say in the Gemara, right? She can gain and she doesn't lose. What's the problem? Refusing to share is an expression of midat sdom. We may not like that language, but it's Chazal's language. Chazal want us to not want to be like Sdom, and Chazal warn us that sometimes our behaviors can be just like Sdom.
Is that any bearing how responsible the borrower would be with the item?
According to one of my daughters, yes, actually. How interesting. I think, yeah, since my daughter couldn't sign a guaranteed waiver, that's why she went out cold on Friday night. I think, of course, there is. One has to be responsible, and a lack of responsibility means that it'll be foolish of me to lend to somebody who I think is going to wreck or ruin something of mine. But we're talking about, in general, where a person is trustworthy. And I simply say no. I simply say no, bedavka. Saying no, bedavka is mamash midat sdom. Again, this isn't Rav Kook speaking. This is, this is a Torah speaking. This is a Mishnah speaking. This is a Gemara speaking. And there is something about Mayim Achronim which is meant to remind us to not be entrapped by the demons of Midat Sdom. Okay?
He says it in a very nice way though, because he says, basically we're good, we've got the Midat HaChesed, etc. And we shouldn't allow the Melach Sdomit, so to speak, to
Blind us.
To sway us in the wrong direction.
100%. Both what he says and how he says it is uplifting. So beautiful. He continues, he says, Al-ken mikosu dashe ochal adam. For every individual meal that a person has, shishtamshut min banot chushit ve'echrach li'aker b'kirbo et elkam la'avir meneged einav ha'agashot v'ruchaniyot ha'mekarvot ha'adam el hashlemut ha'amiti. Every meal, we have the opportunity to make sure that our values are in order, make sure that our balance of our enjoyment of the physical and material world doesn't come at the cost of self-interest. Right? That's the overall message. And as a result of this, our sages instituted some kind of trufa, right? Some kind of medicine that both before the meal is meant to lift us, so that when we begin our meal, we think not just of ourselves, but beyond ourselves. To remind yourself that you're eating sanctified bread. Don't forget, we are all Kohanim. We are all priests. And when we wash our hands in a priestly way before we eat, which is basically why we wash our hands. If I'm washing my hands because they're dirty, I'm washing my hands to clean them. When I wash my hands before I eat bread, my hands are already clean. I'm doing it for spiritual reasons. What is a spiritual reason? It is connected to the pasuk, as we said. What is kadosh? Kadosh is to think beyond yourself before you put the sandwich in your mouth, before you think about those beyond yourself, even in the moment when you're looking after yourself. Remember that though you have a nature, and a nature which can be either attuned to the spiritual, but it also can fall because of your lust for the material, wash your hands, and this will remind you to be balanced. But you do that before the meal, but then you can get lost when you're enjoying the meal. So Mayim Achronim is there to serve as a further reminder. We may well say, okay, well, but which one's more important? Well, the Gemara already tells us. And this is a good way to understand what they said, because Mayim Rishonim mitzvah. The washing hands before the meal is a mitzvah. Mayim Achronim chova. Our sages say that Mayim Achronim is chova. Chova you can interpret either halachically chova, or shall we say ethically chova. What you do with that, we can leave to.
I don't understand the word.
Chova means we're absolutely obligated. Mandatory, right. So meaning the washing of hands we do before we have bread technically is less stringent than the washing of hands that some people currently do, called Mayim Achronim, before they bench.
Yet there's no bracha.
No bracha. Again, how we interpret this halachically we'll put to another time. But within this context, he's saying when you understand this idea. Before you wash your hands, it reminds you to eat b'kedusha. Okay, and we do that, and it's a mitzvah. And therefore we have a bracha to say it's a mitzvah. But afterwards, we wash our hands again to remove the melech sdomit, put aside the physical possibilities of any melech sdomit being present. It's to remove ourselves from those associations of stom. Did you think about others when you were eating? Right? Were you generous? Did you share your table with others? The first washing, the washing which we call Maim Rishonim, is there to basically ready yourself that you should be sensitized to eat in a sense of purity and sanctity. However, our sages did not call that a chuvah. It's not absolutely required in terms of this understanding of that mitzvah. But the ones after the meal are necessary to make sure, to quickly make sure that we haven't strayed, to make sure that we understand, having just benefited, having just enjoyed the material pleasures of food, the physical pleasures of food, that we're not just thinking about ourselves, not just thinking about that sense of me, myself, and I. המונעות את תנובת החסד והצדק הראויים לשא ענף, לשאת פרי ברכה בכל נפש יקרה, הם המלך סדומית המשמע את העיניים וראו להעבירם על הפעולות הנמשכות מעצת הנפש ויציאות בפועל ידי הידיים, לשוב אל הקדושה. In short, by having both the washing before the meal and afterwards, this keeps us in check. And make sure that we recognize that we've been given blessings, but we don't treat our food the way Stom related to their food, right? As we saw in the Pasuk in Yechezkel. To make sure that we relate to our meals with sanctity, and relate to the material and physical gifts that we've been given with purity and with sanctity. V'yitem kadoshim, that's what the Pasuk says, which is a proof text to remember of Maim Achronim. Just as you need to be holy, right? And need to ready yourself to be holy. And you shouldn't basically be worried that by sharing what you have, somehow you're going to lose out. שהרגשת עצמו יותר מדי שהיא חטאת סדום לתאווה יבקש בפרט. And so this action of purifying ourselves hopefully shall achieve its goal to remove that sense of lacking, which is what the people of Sdom felt even when they gave what they didn't lose by giving. It will remove that sense of me, myself, and I, which is a chet of Sdom. תאווה יבקש כי הרגשה שכלית מובילה את האדם להשכיל את זולתו כאל עצמו. Ultimately, a person can reach an understanding to think about others as much as they think about themselves. כי בשכל אין פרטיות, כי אם כלליות. Intellectually, we often think on a much more broader scale. להיות האדם נוטה אל שכלו יותר מאל חומרו. נמשכים מקשותיו אל ההרגשה השכלית שמכרת רק צדק ויושר. When you think and you pause about this human situation, then you're able to be much more considerate to others. Where is our downfall? When we are involved in the visual material world, not the intellectual world, not the kind of reflective world, but instead in the physical world. When I'm benefiting, when it's mine, when it's a thing, that's when sometimes those inner demons come out. It's amazing. You can have people who are so generous intellectually, but you do something to them which damages something of theirs or take something from them, then they go after you, right? Then all of a sudden they're a whole different person. And that's his point. על כן, איננו נפרד לעצמו, אבל כל זמן שימשך אחר ערב לחושיו, בלבד הנה הוא נפרד לעצמו, כי אין בחושים כל אחד, כי אם פרטים, כי דברי הרמב"ם מורה נבוכים, אין פרט בשכל ואין כלל בחוש. This is a lovely line by the Rambam. En prat b'sechel, there's no individual when it comes into the intellect. Ben klal b'chush, when it comes to the sensory feelings, often we're not thinking about the klal. Yesod HaKdosha hi tamid hitachdut hapratim b'klal echad. And so the idea of sanctity is about trying to unify that sense of the individual to the wider klal. Al ken en davar sheb'kedusha pachot me'asara. That's why we have the idea of praying together, or bringing together, to remind ourselves that true holiness is found when, to you, when you collectively should be as one together. Now, just before we wrap up, let's just look at the Gemara once again. Has he explained all parts of this Gemara? No. He's given us a petach to understand the core introduction to this teaching. Does he write more on the next piece? Let me just check. Yeah, he does. He does then have a piece about the cat and things like that. And I'm happy to send it to you or send you a link for you to learn it. So he breaks it down because there is the introductory bit and then there's the next bit, and that he does have something to say about. But even with what he's done, just reflect. We have a teaching about a person in a bed with ashes and a chicken, and I'm like, I don't know. It's about sight. It's about demons. It's a closed door to me, right? It's a locked idea to me. Then he explains that we're talking about piwud and achdut. He talks about ash. He talks about binding. He talks about selfishness. He talks about the way sometimes people do their own thing, especially when it's self-beneficial. He references the Gemara and Barachot about Tanagolim, and he says, I think in here, there is the key to unlock this door. He then does so, and then he moves on and he speaks more broadly while referencing Maim Rishonim, Maim Achronim, to the overall ethic about striking the right balance between our physical and spiritual life, about unifying our physical and spiritual life. That's the ultimate achdut. It's about making sure that how we live as physical beings, while also striving and living with a consciousness of our spiritual identity, how we can live in a unified way. And taken together, he says some beautiful things, really beautiful. This is healing Torah. This is uplifting Torah. Is it halachic? No. Does he know how to explain halacha? Of course, as I say, I'm happy to discuss the din of Maim Achronim. Perhaps I'll send something later on in the chat. But here we're exploring the symbolism of Maim Rishonim and Maim Achronim. Imagine we thought about this before we washed, right? And whether or not we then do Maim Achronim, but we just thought about this idea before we eat a meal, changes how we eat. Truth is, changes how we do so many things, right? Before we wash our hands in the morning to start our day, make ourselves a coffee, whatever. We immerse ourselves in the life that we're leading. And this can serve as a reminder to say, remember, the world is bigger than you. Live your life not just through your chushim, but also with your seichel. Bind it together by checking yourself, by putting the beginning and end of your meals, beginning and end of your day, and beginning and end of everything that you do. Some kind of indicator, reminder to be holy.
We quotes himself from this Masechet Chulin here. Is that also a piece about Nagada, or just?
He's not quoting from Masechet Chulin because he didn't write directly on. He only has Ayeh on Barachot and Shabbat and a few other minor Masechtot. Elsewhere, I didn't check. He has a commentary on the Siddur. It could be that he wrote it there. He's quoting himself from somewhere else.
Right. It says on Chulin.
No, he's quoting himself where he quotes Gemara Chulin, but it's not. You're right.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Well, it's not, he didn't write a full commentary on Masechet Chulin.
Where he said something.
On Chulin elsewhere. I mean, I don't know if it says it here. I don't think so, but maybe he does. Write it down. This is something he shared and he feels it's worthy to share here. I don't know if it's exactly what he writes elsewhere. Maybe he adds more there, maybe he adds more here. But the concept is clearly one which is not only significant to him, he feels bears repeating. It's reflective really of his overall ideology of bringing meaning into mitzvahs, right? Of finding spirituality in ritual. And if you understand what Maimon Shonim and Maimon Choinma through this prism, for short changes, it changes everything. Makes you think carefully when you get up from a meal. You say, okay, I've just filled my stomach. What do I now do in terms of thinking about those around us? A complete aside, we mentioned cats at the beginning. Unfortunately, my neighbor, the neighbor who lives literally opposite my house, has been very sick for quite so many months. And he's not conscious and he hasn't been for some weeks. And we're hoping that he gets better. But he has a dog and a cat. And he's been in hospital he's been in and out of hospital for a year, but permanent in hospital for maybe now 4 or 5 months. And his wife's been there for almost all the time. Especially on Shabbat. So my daughters will look after their dog and their cat. We don't have a dog, we don't have a cat, but now we're looking after George and Gaia, right? Gaia is a dog and George is a cat. So, and they're really good at doing that. And it's a very sweet chesed. But of course, there's a din. You're not allowed to eat, right, until you've fed your food. But when it's your neighbor's animal, fed your animals. When it's neighbor's animals, sometimes we'll kind of like, if you forget, because we're good at this, but we're also working our schedule. So just this past Friday night, we were just about to make Kiddush, start sang Shalom Aleichem, and I can hear a dog barking. I said, did you feed Gaia? Oh, I'm so busy. I said, we have to stop. Right, so we paused. My daughters went across the road. I actually went with one of them because she was a bit dark at the back of their garden. We fed George, fed Gaia. And whatever, I came back, washed our hands, because just touching pet food and things like that, continuing the meal. It's a small thing, and it's a sweet thing. But when I came back to continue with Eshet Chayil, I was a different person to who I was before I started Shalom Aleichem. Because in that moment, we cared for something else above and beyond those around the table. We've committed to do so. We generally do so. They've just forgotten before the meal. They're very, very particular to feed before we eat. Meaning, we understand that if it's your neighbor's animal, you should still feed them before you enjoy your meal. It changes you when you think about other people or even other animals before you're eating. It makes you widen your vista, your network, the way you see the world. And say this is just a temporary thing in terms of my house, and it's about only like 20 meters wider, right? Because they only live across the road. But imagine we all did that just in terms of just thinking. When you wash your hands, think of other people. Don't be like stone. Ask yourself who in your apartment block might be hungry today. Right? When you're finishing your meal and you've got something left over, maybe think, who can I share this with? If you made this into a habit, which is meant to be a habit, I'm not doing a thing, it would change the way we eat, change the way we live. It brings spirituality into one of the most mundane and human experiences, namely eating. So this is Rav Kook on Brachot Vav Amud Aleph. Again, I'm happy to send you the piece about the cat and things like that. But overall, I think we learn remarkable things from this remarkable teacher about how to read a cryptic teaching and make sense of it. And Be'ezrat Hashem, learn lessons that can make our life better and the life of others as well. So what's up?
It's beautiful. Are there those who take this piece?
In as much as eating the cat thing, like we said before. There are always people who take things strange. Like, are there? I mean, the answer is there's always people who take, as I mentioned before, a person who's curious, who doesn't understand that this can be understood differently, who takes it literally. Their fault isn't in them. Actually, that's remarkable. Their fault is in that teacher, right, whose job it is to explain there are certain things to understand literally and certain things not, So are there? Quite probably. Do I laugh at them per se? No. Do I think that our education towards interpreting what we call hard texts is not brilliant? Totally. And the more we actually understand these texts with a little bit more sensitivity, like Rob Kook does, the more we learn from them. It's not just about cat and afterbirth, it's about, again, we haven't even got to that bit, but even the beginning about the chickens and the ashes, the whole philosophy.
Yeah, well, he explains it beautifully.
Right.
The thing of the chicken.
Right.
I mean, now I'm very bothered about the thing with the cat.
Then you have to learn it,
It was
then that's it.
It was worth going through that yucky stuff with the cats to get to the lesson.
I didn't actually bring the cat here, I only did is read a few words and
But
that,
you know, we're very, living in Beit Shemesh, we are very aware of cats. They're everywhere, not usually black.
Wait, can you just explain the words in prat, the seichel?
well, he's saying, prat means individual and klal is the collective, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
he's quoting the Rambam and saying, our intellectual worldview generally isn't limited to the individual, and our physical worldview is generally not attuned to the collective. I mean, that's how I understand it.
Also difficult. I mean, there are people who think mainly about themselves or yeah.
We also talk about people who say the demons got them.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
And some
It's
people,
huge.
and some people are unfortunately afflicted by these kinds of demons, and our job is to help them.
No problem, but I'm just saying this, this whole idea of what I understood anyway here about the circle being something, that in the circle we're more about the flow. It's like a little hard to understand.
Again, he's quoting the Rambam, he's making a point and he's suggesting a way to harness our intellectual capabilities to balance out our physical desires.
That's something we have to work on. It's
Yeah.
not that's how it is.
I think he's saying that's how it is in general, and that's something we need to work on specifically. Yeah, I don't think it's one or the others. Again, it's something worth exploring further detail. But I hope this has been of help. Shabbat tov.
Very nice. Thank you very much.